A single question from a child can stop the world in its tracks. It was a crisp spring morning in Austin, Texas, the kind where the sun spills gold across the grass, and the air smells like fresh coffee and dew. The Tesla factory hummed in the distance, its glass walls glinting under the sky. Inside a small, quiet room off the main floor, a charity event was setting up. Folding tables held stacks of books for kids. Balloons bobbed in the breeze from an open window, and volunteers whispered last-minute plans. It was the kind of day that felt busy but simple, like nothing could go wrong. Or maybe, like everything could change. Elon Musk stepped into the room, his sneakers soft against the polished floor. In his hand was a tablet, half forgotten, and at his side was his 6-year-old son, X. The boy's small fingers curled around his dad's, not clinging, but holding on like he was anchoring himself to something solid. X wasn't loud or bouncy like most kids his age. His eyes, big and steady, scanned the room. Balloons, tables, strangers' faces, like he was piecing together a puzzle no one else could see. Why do people give things away? He'd asked earlier, his voice soft but sharp, like he already knew the answer but wanted to hear his dad's. Elon had paused, caught off guard. To make someone else's day better, he'd said. X just nodded, but his eyes said he was still thinking. X wasn't like other kids, not because of who his dad was, but because of how he saw things. At home, he'd sit for hours, staring at the stars through a telescope, whispering questions to himself. Why does the sky feel so big? Does it know I'm here? His dad built rockets to touch that sky, but X seemed to want to understand it, to feel it. Sometimes, Elon would find him curled up in a blanket, scribbling drawings of planets with names he made up. This one's called Hope, X said once, pointing to a wobbly circle. It's where sad things go to get fixed. Elon didn't know what to say to that. He was used to solving problems with math and machines, but X's questions were different. They were heavy, like they carried the weight of 1,000 unwritten stories. Now, in the charity room, X let go of his dad's hand and wandered to a table piled with books. A volunteer, a young woman named Clara, with a bright smile, knelt beside him. Want a book, X? She asked, her voice warm like she was talking to her own little brother. X tilted his head, his dark hair falling into his eyes. Do these books know about God? He asked. Clara blinked, her smile faltering just for a second. She wasn't ready for that. No one was. The room kept moving, volunteers stacking chairs, a camera crew setting up for a quick interview with Elon about the event. But X's question hung in the air, like a bell that hadn't stopped ringing. Elon, standing a few feet away, heard it. He looked over, his tablet now forgotten in his hand. What's he thinking now? Elon wondered. X had a way of asking things that made grown-ups pause, like he was pulling at threads no one else saw. Last week, at breakfast, X had looked up from his cereal and asked, Dad, does God ever get tired of listening? Elon had laughed, then stopped when he saw X's face serious, waiting. I don't know, buddy, he'd said. Maybe he's got really good ears. X hadn't laughed. He'd just gone back to his cereal, like he was saving the question for later. Clara, still kneeling, tried to answer. Some books talk about God, she said carefully. What do you think about him? X didn't answer right away. He picked up a book, ran his fingers over the cover, then looked at her. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room's noise. I think God's like the quiet part of the night, when everything else stops. Clara's eyes widened. A volunteer nearby dropped a pen, and it clattered too loud. Elon stepped closer, his face soft, like he was seeing his son for the first time. The camera crew was ready now. The plan was simple. Elon would talk about why he supported the charity, maybe mention a new Tesla project. 3 minutes, in and out. But X was still holding that book, his small shoulders squared like he was carrying something big. Clara leaned closer. What do you mean, X? The quiet part. He looked up, straight into her eyes, and said something that made the whole room go still. What was it? A question, a secret, something so simple it could change everything. The room froze, like the air itself was holding its breath. X's words, I think God's like the quiet part of the night, when everything else stops, hung heavy, like a stone dropped in still water. Clara, the volunteer, stared at the 6-year-old, her hands trembling slightly as she held a book. The camera crew, ready to film Ellen's quick charity pitch, lowered their equipment. A lens glinted under the lights, but no one moved to adjust it. X's small voice had cracked something open, and now the room felt too small for what was coming. Elon stepped closer, his sneakers squeaking faintly on the floor. X, he said softly. What made you say that? His voice was gentle, but there was an edge to it. Like he was bracing for something he couldn't predict. X didn't look at his dad. His eyes stayed on Clara, steady, searching. Sometimes. I hear it, he said. The quiet. It's loud when I'm scared. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. What's he mean? She thought. What's a kid like him scared of? The question burned, but before she could ask, a sharp voice cut through. Elon. We're on in 2 minutes. The event coordinator, a woman with a clipboard and a tight smile, waved from across the room. Her heels clicked fast, urgent. The charity event was behind schedule, and the crowd outside was growing restless. Kids were tugging at parents' sleeves, balloons slipping from tiny hands. The plan was falling apart, and X's question had derailed the carefully scripted moment. Elon glanced at the coordinator, then back at his son. His jaw tightened. He was used to fixing chaos factories, rockets, deadlines, but this was different. This was X, and X didn't follow scripts. X clutched the book tighter, its corners digging into his palms. His small chest rose and fell, faster now. I didn't mean to mess it up, he whispered, so quiet only Clara heard. His eyes flicked to the crowd outside the window, their voices a low hum through the glass. They're all waiting, he thought. They want Dad to talk, not me. The weight of it pressed on him, heavy like the dreams he had at night, dreams where the stars spoke. But he couldn't answer back. He'd told his dad once, the stars sound sad sometimes. Elon had nodded, thinking it was just a kid's imagination. But now, watching X's face, he wasn't so sure. Clara knelt closer, her voice a whisper. You didn't mess anything up. X, what's the quiet like? X's fingers froze on the book. His eyes went distant, like he was looking past the room, past the factory, past the sky. It's like someone's there, but they're waiting for me to talk first, and I don't know what to say. His voice cracked, just a little. Clara's heart twisted. She wanted to hug him, to tell him it was okay, but the coordinator's voice snapped again. Elon. Now the camera crew scrambled, lights buzzing as they flicked on. The room was moving again, but X stood still, like a small island in a rushing river. Elon crouched beside his son. You don't have to say anything, buddy, he said, his hand on X's shoulder. But X shook his head, sharp and stubborn. I do, he said, because it's important. Ellen's breath caught. What's important, he thought. What's going on in that head of yours? He'd built machines that touched the stars, but his son's heart was a mystery he couldn't solve. And now, with the cameras rolling and the crowd waiting, X was about to say something that could break every plan apart. The coordinator stormed over, her clipboard clutched like a shield. We can't delay anymore, she hissed. The donors are here. They want Elon, not. She stopped, glancing at X, her face softening for a split second before hardening again. We need to move. X looked up at her, his eyes big and unblinking. I'm not trying to stop it, he said, his voice small but firm. I just want to ask something. The coordinator froze. The room went quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding a secret too big to keep. Clara leaned in, her voice barely audible. What do you want to ask, X? He turned to her, then to the camera, its red light blinking like a heartbeat. His hands shook, but he didn't look away. If God's listening, he said, why does it feel like he's so far away? The question landed like thunder. The coordinator dropped her pen. A volunteer gasped. Ellen's hand tightened on X's shoulder, not to stop him, but to hold on. The camera zoomed in, unscripted, catching the tremble in X's lip. The crowd outside grew louder, unaware of the storm breaking inside, and then X said something else, something that made the whole world stop. What was it? A plea, a truth, or something so raw it could tear the room apart? X's question, if God's listening, why does it feel like he's so far away? Cut through the room like a knife through silk. The camera's red light blinked, steady as a heartbeat, but the air felt heavier now, like it was carrying the weight of every unanswered prayer. X's small hands shook as he clutched the book, its edges worn soft from his grip. His eyes, wide and glassy, stared into the camera, not at it, but through it, like he was searching for something no one else could see. The coordinator stood, frozen, her clipboard forgotten. Clara, still kneeling beside X, felt her throat tighten. He's just a kid, she thought. How does he carry this? Ellen's hand rested on X's shoulder, but it felt helpless, like he was trying to hold onto a storm. X, he whispered, his voice rough, you don't have to do this. But X's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, his steady gaze faltered. I'm tired, Dad, he said, so soft it barely reached the microphone. I keep asking, but it's like nobody answers. The words cracked something in the room. A volunteer in the back covered her mouth, her eyes wet. The camera operator blinked hard, his hands shaking on the rig. X's voice wasn't loud, but it was heavy, like it carried every night he'd lain awake, whispering questions to the dark. Why does it feel so big? Why am I so small? The crowd outside the window pressed closer, their murmurs seeping through the glass. They didn't know what was happening, didn't hear X's words, but they felt the shift, like a tide turning. The coordinator snapped back to life, her voice sharp. We need to start the interview now. But no one moved. X's question wasn't just a question, it was a mirror, and everyone in the room saw their own fears reflected back. Clara reached out, her hand hovering near X's. It's okay to feel that way, she said, her voice trembling. I feel it too sometimes. X looked at her, his lip quivering. But what if he's gone? He asked. What if I'm talking to nothing? The room went still, the kind of still where even the lights seemed to dim. Ellen's face crumpled, just for a second, before he caught himself. He was used to solving impossible problems, rockets that shouldn't fly, cars that shouldn't work, but this was his son, his heart, breaking open in front of strangers. I can't fix this, he thought, his hands clenching. I don't know how. X's small body seemed to shrink, his shoulders curling inward like he wanted to disappear. The book slipped from his hands, thudding softly on the floor. He stared at it, eyes burning. I just wanted to know, he whispered, if he sees me. The silence stretched, unbearable. Clara's heart pounded, her mind racing for something to say, something to pull X back from the edge. The coordinator opened her mouth, ready to push the schedule forward, but a new sound stopped her, a soft creak from the back of the room. An older man, one of the volunteers, stepped forward. His hands were rough, scarred from years of work, and his eyes were tired but kind. He held a small, folded piece of cloth, worn and faded, like it had been carried for years. X, he said, his voice steady but warm. I heard you. He knelt slowly, joints creaking, and placed the cloth in X's hands. This was my daughter's. She used to ask questions like yours. X unfolded the cloth, his fingers slow, careful. Inside was a tiny silver star, no bigger than a coin, glinting under the lights. She said this helped her feel close to God. The man said, not because it's magic, but because it reminded her to keep asking. X held the star, turning it over in his hands. His breath hitched, and a single tear slipped down his cheek. Does it still work? He asked, his voice so small it could break you. The man smiled, soft and sad. It works if you hold it tight and don't give up. Elon watched, his hands still, his eyes locked on his son. Something shifted in him, like a gear clicking into place. He's not alone, Elon thought. He's never been alone. X's fingers closed around the star, and he looked up, first at the man, then at Clara, then at the camera. I don't want to be scared anymore, he said, louder now, like he was speaking to the sky itself. I want to know what God says back. The room held its breath. The camera zoomed closer, catching the spark in X's eyes, a spark that wasn't there before. Clara leaned forward, her voice a whisper. What do you think he'd say? X opened his mouth, and what came out wasn't just words, it was a truth so raw, so bright. It could light up the dark or burn it away. What did he say? Something that could heal a heart, or something that could shake the world. The room pulsed with a silence so thick it felt alive. X's small hand clutched the silver star, its edges pressing into his palm like it was trying to speak. His question, I want to know what God says back, hung in the air, sharp and fragile, like a glass about to shatter. The camera's red light blinked, relentless, capturing every tremble in X's lip, every flicker in his wide, searching eyes. Clara, still kneeling beside him, held her breath. Elon stood frozen, his hands hovering, as if he wanted to shield his son but didn't know how. The old volunteer, his face etched with years of quiet grief, watched X like he was seeing his own daughter again. The crowd outside the window grew louder, their voices a restless hum. But inside, time seemed to bend, waiting for X to speak. X's chest rose and fell, faster now, like he was running towards something he couldn't see. His fingers tightened around the star, and his voice, small but steady, broke the silence. I think God says, you're enough. The words landed like a spark in dry grass, igniting the room. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The coordinator, still gripping her clipboard, let it slip to her side. The camera operator's hands shook, the lens catching the glint of the star in X's palm. You're enough. 3 words, so simple. Yet they cracked open something raw, something hidden, something everyone in the room had buried deep. X's eyes burned, not with tears now, but with a fire that seemed too big for his small frame. His shoulders straightened, and for the first time, he didn't look small or scared. I thought I had to know everything, he said, his voice louder, like it was pushing through a wall, like I had to ask the right questions, or I wasn't good enough. He looked at the star, then at the old volunteer. But maybe God's not far away. Maybe he's been here, and I just didn't see. His words hit like a wave, washing over the room, leaving everyone breathless. Ellen's face softened, his eyes wet, not with sadness but with something deeper, pride, maybe, or awe. He's always been like this, Elon thought. I just didn't listen hard enough. Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. X, how do you know that? He turned to her, his gaze steady, unblinking. Because when I hold this, he said, lifting the star, it feels like someone's holding me back. The revelation wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was earth-shaking. It wasn't just X's truth, it was everyone's. The volunteer's eyes glistened, his hands shaking as he nodded. My daughter said that too, he whispered. Before she left, she said she felt held. The room tilted, like the ground itself had shifted. The camera caught it all, the volunteer's trembling voice, X's burning eyes, the coordinator wiping her cheek, pretending it was dust. X's heart raced, his breath shallow. Is this real? He thought. Did I find it? His whole life, he'd felt small, like his questions were too big for his voice, like he was shouting into a void. But now, holding the star, he felt something new, something warm, like a hand on his shoulder, invisible but real. It wasn't an answer, not exactly, but it was enough. His chest loosened, and he took a deep breath, the first one that didn't hurt. But the weight wasn't gone. It was heavier now, not with fear, but with purpose. He looked at the camera, its red light like a star of its own, and realized something. They're all listening. They need this to. The coordinator's voice broke through. After now, we need to start the interview. But no one cared about schedules anymore. The crowd outside was pressing against the windows, drawn by the quiet storm inside. X stood up, small but tall, the star still in his hand. His eyes met Ellen's, and for a moment, they weren't father and son, they were two people seeing each other, really seeing. Dad, X said, his voice clear. I want to tell them. Elon blinked, caught off guard. Tell them what, buddy? X's lips curved, not a smile, but something fiercer. That they're enough to. The room held its breath again. But this time, it wasn't heavy, it was electric. X turned to the camera, his small frame filling the frame like he was 10 feet tall. He wasn't scared anymore. He was ready. I'm going to talk to them, he said, not asking, but deciding, not just here, everywhere. Clara's eyes widened. The volunteer nodded, like he'd known this was coming. Ellen's hand found X's, not to stop him, but to hold on. The camera zoomed in, the red light steady, waiting. X took a step forward, toward the crowd, toward the world, ready to share a truth that could change everything. But what would he say first? And would the world be ready to hear it? The room crackled with tension, like a storm about to break. X stood small but fierce, the silver star glinting in his hand, its light catching the camera's lens like a beacon. His words, I'm going to talk to them, not just here, everywhere, echoed in the silence. A promise so big it seemed to pull the air from the room. The crowd outside pressed against the windows, their faces a blur of curiosity and impatience. The camera's red light blinked, steady, unyielding, as if it knew what was at stake. X's heart pounded, a drumbeat in his chest. They're all watching, he thought. If I mess this up, they'll never hear it. The weight of it, of carrying a truth so raw it could change hearts, pressed down on his small shoulders, heavy enough to crush him. Ellen's hand rested on X's back, warm but trembling. You sure, buddy? He asked, his voice low, like he was afraid to break the moment. X nodded, his eyes locked on the crowd outside. I have to, he said. They're waiting. Clara, still kneeling nearby, wiped her eyes, her breath shaky. The old volunteer, his scarred hands clasped tight, whispered, Go on, kid, you've got this. But the coordinator, her face pale, stepped forward. We can't do this, she hissed. This is a charity event, not a sermon. The donors will leave. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. The stakes were clear. If X spoke now, unscripted, raw, he could derail the event, alienate the crowd, and turn a simple fundraiser into chaos. But if he stayed silent, he'd lose something bigger, the chance to share the truth burning inside. X's breath hitched. His fingers tightened around the star, its edges biting into his palm. What if they don't listen? He thought. What if they laugh? His mind flashed to nights alone in his room, whispering questions to the dark, feeling small under the vast sky. He'd always wondered if he was enough, if his voice mattered. Now, with the world watching, that fear clawed at him, sharp and cold. His legs shook, and for a moment, he wanted to run back to his dad, back to the quiet, back to the safety of questions unanswered. But the star in his hand felt warm, like a heartbeat. You're enough, it seemed to say. You've always been enough. The coordinator grabbed the microphone, her hands shaking. We're starting the interview now, she said, her voice loud but brittle. The camera crew hesitated, their eyes on X. The crowd outside banged on the windows, their voices rising restless, demanding. Time was running out. X's chest tightened, his breath shallow. I can't do this, he thought, his heart racing. I'm too small. But then he looked at the volunteer, at Clara, at his dad. Their faces weren't just watching, they were waiting, hoping, believing. He wasn't alone, not anymore. X stepped forward, his sneakers squeaking on the floor. The coordinator's eyes widened. X, no, she started. But he didn't stop. He reached for the microphone, his small hand steady. Despite the tremble in his fingers, the room went silent. The kind of silence that feels like the world holding its breath. The crowd outside quieted, sensing something big. X lifted the microphone, his voice soft but clear, cutting through the tension like a light through fog. I was scared, he said. I thought God was too far away to hear me. But he's not. He's in the quiet, in the way you feel when you're not alone. And he says you're enough, all of you. The words hit like thunder. The coordinator froze, her clipboard clattering to the floor. Clara's hands covered her mouth, tears spilling over. The volunteer nodded, his eyes shining like he'd found something he'd lost years ago. Ellen's breath caught, his hand tightening on X's shoulder, not to stop him, but to hold on. The crowd outside went still, their faces pressed to the glass, eyes wide. The camera zoomed in, catching the fire in X's gaze, the star glinting in his hand. He did it, Clara thought, her heart pounding. He said it, but it wasn't over. A man from the crowd pushed through the door, his face red, his voice loud. This isn't what we came for, he shouted. We're here for the charity, not some kid's speech. The tension snapped back, sharper now. The coordinator nodded, desperate. He's right. We need to. But X turned to the man, unafraid, his voice steady. You're enough to, he said. Even if you're mad. The man stopped, his mouth open, no words coming. The room trembled, like it was caught between breaking and healing. X lowered the microphone, his small chest heaving, his eyes burned with tears. But he didn't cry. He felt lighter, like the star had taken the weight he'd carried too long. I did it, he thought. I told them. He looked at his dad, who knelt beside him, his face soft, proud. You were incredible, Elon whispered. X nodded, his fingers still curled around the star. He'd faced the fear, the doubt, the eyes of the world, and he'd won not by being loud, but by being true. The crowd outside started to clap, slow at first, then louder, like a wave breaking. The camera caught it all, the moment spreading, beyond the room, beyond Austin, into hearts watching from screens far away. X had done it. He'd shared his truth, and the world would never be the same. The applause rolled through the room like a tide, soft at first, then swelling, spilling through the open windows into the Austin night. X stood still, the silver star warm in his hand, its edges no longer sharp but soft, like it had molded to his touch. The microphone lay on the table, its cord tangled, forgotten. The crowd outside pressed closer, their faces lit by the glow of fairy lights, no longer restless but reverent. The man who'd shouted moments ago stood silent, his hands limp at his sides, his eyes fixed on X like he was seeing something he'd lost long ago. The camera's red light blinked one last time before fading to black. But the moment didn't. And it breathed, alive, in every heart that heard it. X's small chest rose and fell, his breath steady now, not racing. He felt different, lighter, like the weight of his questions had lifted, leaving behind something new. I said it, he thought, his fingers tracing the star's edges. And they listened. His eyes, once heavy with doubt, shone with a quiet strength. He wasn't the same boy who'd walked into the room, clutching his dad's hand, afraid his voice was too small. He was wiser now, not because he had all the answers, but because he'd learned it was okay to ask. Elon knelt beside him, his face soft, his hands steady. You changed something today, buddy, he whispered. X looked up, his lips curving just a little. Did I make it better? Ellen's throat tightened. Yeah, you did. Clara sat back, her hands folded in her lap. Tears drying on her cheeks, she watched X, marveling at how a 6-year-old had turned a room of strangers into a family, bound by a simple truth. You're enough. The old volunteer, still standing nearby, clutched his scarf, the one his daughter had loved. His eyes met X's, and he nodded, a silent thank you for giving him back a piece of her. The coordinator, her clipboard abandoned on a chair, leaned against the wall, her face soft for the first time all day. She didn't care about schedules anymore. The crowd outside didn't either. They stood still, some holding hands, others whispering X's words to each other. You're enough. X's journey hadn't been easy. He'd carried questions bigger than himself, fears that woke him in the night, whispering to stars that seemed too far away. He'd faced a room full of eyes, a world ready to judge, and a fear that his voice wouldn't matter. But he'd stood up, spoken his truth, and found something stronger than fear. Courage, not loud or flashy, but quiet, like the star in his hand. He hadn't lost anything, not really. He'd gained something heavier, something precious, the knowledge that his words could touch hearts, that his questions could light a spark. The room grew quiet again, not heavy, but peaceful, like the hush after a storm. X slipped the star into his pocket, its warmth lingering against his skin. He looked at his dad, then at the crowd, their faces soft in the dim light. They're like me, he thought. They've been scared too. He realized something then, something big. His questions weren't just his. They belonged to everyone. The volunteer missing his daughter, the coordinator hiding her stress, the man who'd shouted his anger. They all needed to hear it, to feel it. You're enough. As Elon lifted X into his arms, the boy leaned against his dad's shoulder, his eyes heavy but bright. The crowd began to disperse, their voices soft, carrying X's words into the night. Somewhere, a teacher would write "You're enough" on a classroom board. A nurse would whisper it to a patient. A stranger would text it to someone they hadn't spoken to in years. The world was shifting, not with noise or grand gestures, but with a quiet truth, spoken by a child who dared to ask. What does it mean to be enough, to stand in your own smallness and still shine? X's journey asks us to look at ourselves, to listen to the quiet, to hold our own stars and not be afraid. He showed us that the biggest truths don't need big voices, just brave ones. And as the lights dimmed in that Austin room, one truth lingered, soft but unshakable. Sometimes, the smallest heart holds the biggest light. If this story touched you, like the video and follow for more moments that remind us who we are.